What's going on YouTube world? Austin Zaback here with another YouTube video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the Joe Rogan Experience, the Joe Rogan podcast, and the fact that he just locked up a deal with Spotify for $100 million. And I want to talk about what that means for entertainment, podcasters, social media influencers, and just in general, what that deal really does as a whole to social media. Now, if you are not familiar with Joe Rogan, maybe Fear Factor will jog your memory. You know the show where I'm talking about, where they did crazy stunts like hanging from a cargo net of a helicopter and lighting up a fuel station right below them. They ate crazy things like cow snouts with cheese covered in maggots. They sat in bathtubs with disgusting things such as leeches. And Joe Rogan is also known for being the commentator for the UFC. Joe Rogan had a really big name before his podcast, and I'll say that after the podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience, his name just got even bigger. And now with the $100 million Spotify deal, it is pretty much going to be a household name moving forward. So let's go ahead and break down what this really means for podcasters, social media influencers, and entertainment in general, and really break it down. If you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you would go ahead and smash that like button. It really does help me with the YouTube algorithm. If you didn't know, there are currently over 1 million different podcasts in the United States alone, with over 29 million downloads. 75% of the US is familiar with the term podcasting. 50% of the United States would say they are podcast fans. 55% of the US, or 155 million people, say they have listened to a podcast. 37%, or 104 million, say that they listen to a podcast every single month. 24%, or 68 million, say they listen to a podcast on a weekly basis. And 16 million people in the United States would say they are an avid podcast fan. So with the Joe Rogan deal, the $100 million Spotify deal, I do not personally think that it was about the money at all. I think that there were a lot of other reasons that he did the deal, which we're going to talk about, so stay tuned until the end of the video, but I really don't think that it had anything to do with money. Some of the details of the deal are that the Joe Rogan Experience will be exclusive to Spotify. And Spotify doesn't own Joe Rogan, nor do they own the rights to the podcast forever, but I will say that I would imagine, and nobody knows as of yet, that the podcast will be exclusive to Spotify per that $100 million contract for probably somewhere between 3 and 4 years. And again, with it being an estimated $100 million contract over the course of, let's just say, 3 years, it would be about $33 million per year if you kind of broke it down. So we talked about it not being about the money for Joe. I think he was very, very successful with the UFC, and I think he was very successful with Fear Factor. With the UFC, they say that maybe he made anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000 per fight, and towards the end, I would imagine he made even more than that, considering Dana White tends to typically lean towards having a lot of favor towards the people that he really likes. And with Fear Factor, it is not entirely clear as to how much money he made, but I would imagine he made pretty good money with Fear Factor, and he was probably good and set for the rest of his life, even without ever starting the Joe Rogan Experience. And that is not including how much money he's made with the Joe Rogan Experience over the last couple of years. And the way that YouTube and the way that podcasting works in a nutshell is that you get paid by what they call CPM. And CPM stands for cost per mile, which essentially means that you get a dollar amount per every 1,000 views that you get. And on the podcast app or the Apple app, rather than it being views, it is about downloads. Now, the Joe Rogan Experience on the podcast app was getting about 190 million downloads a month. For the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that his CPM on the podcast app was about $10. Assuming a $10 CPM at 190 million downloads a month, he would have been making on average about $1.9 million a month, which averages out to about $20 or $22 million per year just from the downloads he was getting on the podcast app. Now, there are definitely ads and there are also sponsorships, and I'm not entirely sure how many of those Joe Rogan did, as I did not watch every single one of his episodes. I know that he was on like 1,400 or 1,500 episodes, which is pretty crazy. I mean, they're really long. They are phenomenal, by the way, okay? I am a huge Joe Rogan fan, but I don't know how many of those he actually did, but just remember that if he did any of those, that would be a significant amount of money as well. And that's also not including what amount of money he would have been making on YouTube or affiliate links or anything like that. I will say that there were multiple different occasions where Joe Rogan was battling YouTube with demonetization policy, and over the last couple of years, demonetization has been a big thing with YouTube, as YouTube has demonetized a lot of different people for doing a lot of different things, primarily related to the fact that when people talk about controversial issues or they talk about things that YouTube doesn't deem monetizable. And to my knowledge, Joe had reportedly talked multiple times about how YouTube should just find the advertiser that is likely to want to advertise on a riskier type of content, rather than just having this vague net that automatically decides if it is suitable for advertisers or not. And in a nutshell, what Joe's argument reportedly was, multiple different times, was, hey, YouTube, you know, look, find advertisers that are cool with the riskier type of content and find advertisers that are not cool, and then let them choose what they do and don't want to advertise on, rather than just demonetizing anything and everything that doesn't meet the criteria. Anyways, let's just assume that he was making money from YouTube and he was not demonetized. He was getting anywhere from 70 to 100 million views a month on YouTube, and still is until this day. And based on everything I can gather, if he was getting monetized on YouTube, his CPM was probably anywhere from $5 to $10. Could have been a little bit less and could have been a little bit more, but based on everything I know, probably $5 to $10. So let's just assume he was making another $500,000 to $1 million with YouTube ad revenue alone. Take the 22 million we talked about a little while ago with the podcast app and add another $5 to $10 million. Add in affiliate links and sponsorships and all sorts of other ways that social media influencers make money, and you're probably making about $50 million a year if you're Joe Rogan, okay? So again, I don't think he's strapped for money. He's been making this type of money for some time now, and I think that he made the deal with Spotify for multiple other reasons, not really necessarily about the money. Now, I will say with ad revenue, whether or not we're talking about YouTube or podcasts or Spotify or really anything of the sort, it will take a hit depending on the economy. If the economy gets hit hard and big companies get hit hard, at the end of the day, a company, if they get hit hard for whatever crazy reason, probably one of the first things they're going to cut out of all of their expenses is their marketing budget. But really, in a nutshell, Joe Rogan is just the topic of conversation. But what I think this deal stands for is much bigger than Joe Rogan. And whether Joe is with Spotify or YouTube or podcasts or maybe even eventually Netflix or Hulu or some other platform that emerges out of nowhere, Joe will always continue to make amazing money, in my opinion, as long as he continues to make amazing content, which he pretty much has over the last however many years. So I think Joe is pretty much taken care of. So why this is huge in my opinion is because I think Joe Rogan landing a $100 million deal with Spotify is really, really big for podcasters. It is really big for social media influencers. As you know, Hollywood and Netflix and Hulu and all of these different things made a lot more money than social media influencers or podcasts or anything kind of like that. So what this really does is it lays the foundation that social media is the future, right? Podcasting is the future. User-created content is the future. And I think this is really, really big. If you ask me, there's a lot of other people that also think this is really, really big. I watched Valuetainment's video also talking about the same thing, and I totally agree with Valuetainment. I agree with what Joe Rogan did. Valuetainment, if you're watching this video, you're probably never going to, but if you do, I agree with both of you. I thoroughly enjoy both of your content. I think it is truly incredible to see what you guys have done, and people in my age demographic look up to guys like you. And the day will come, I think, where people in my age demographic are going to aspire to be like you. So I applaud you for doing what it is that you do. And I just want to say, continue to lay the foundation for guys like me that are a bit younger, because we truly do look up to people like you. And I think I can speak on behalf of my generation, hopefully, and say that we look up to guys like you, and we're just truly excited to see what the future has in store. Spotify obviously got a steal, right? They're valued at about $21 billion, I believe. So at the end of the day, to pay $100 million for a potential 3 or 4 year contract for basically the biggest podcast on the face of the planet to be exclusive to the platform of Spotify is truly a just steal, in my opinion. Spotify's intention is probably to drive more users to the platform of Spotify, but also to pave the path for potentially other podcasters and other things of that nature in the future to be exclusive with Spotify. Spotify obviously brands themselves as this kind of social music platform, right? They want to kind of be that. As you probably know, if you have Spotify, you can see what your friends listen to. You have playlists, right? You have most recently played artists. You have all of these different things with Spotify that you can definitely do. Then of course there's obviously the end of the year recaps, which you can post on your Instagram story, which everybody does. So Spotify is a big company, right? I think all of my friends definitely listen to Spotify. I listen to Spotify with Spotify Premium. I mean, Tesla, right? You look at a Tesla car, okay, I drive a Tesla, and they have the app Spotify literally on the dashboard of a Tesla. There was also a lot of speculation as to why maybe YouTube didn't offer Joe Rogan a bigger deal than what Spotify offered them, and nobody really knows, right? Maybe YouTube did offer him a deal and he didn't take it. Who really knows? And nor does it really matter. At the end of the day, YouTube is owned by Google, and Google is a $1 trillion company. So I can't imagine that YouTube is too concerned about it. At the end of the day, right now, it is just Joe Rogan. I mean, Joe Rogan is huge, right? He's massive. He's like #1. But for YouTube, one person still probably isn't enough to make an impact or to make a dent. Now, YouTube should probably be concerned about more people doing the same thing as Joe Rogan moving forward. But if it is just Joe, it's probably not enough to make that big of a dent. So we will just have to see, right? We have to see what happens. But I will say, I'm very, very excited about what is happening. So to wrap it all up, I really think that Joe Rogan is paving the path to entertainment. He's paving the path of a podcast or a show or something like that really being the future in terms of actual TV shows or movies or things like that, right? And he's really showing that, hey, social media is way bigger than what people might think. There's a lot of money to be made on social media, and it is just so much bigger than maybe people would have realized several years ago, right? So I think it is truly incredible, and I just wanted to share my thoughts with you. Also, if you've ever thought about starting a podcast, I definitely think now is the time to start a podcast. So definitely start a podcast. If you haven't already, I really encourage you to do so. And if you haven't, I actually just also recently started a podcast. I would really appreciate it if you would go check it out. Me and a business partner of mine actually just started it about a month ago. It is called The A&A Show, and the reason why is because my name is Austin and my partner's name is also Austin. He's also a very good friend of mine, and my goal is to bring a ton of value to that podcast/show. So definitely, I would really appreciate it if you would go subscribe. I'll put the link in the description below. Also, let me know what you thought of this video. I would really appreciate it if you would drop that also in the comment section down below. I appreciate you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.